While Keir Starmer's prime ministership may be under threat, no formal leadership contest has been launched. However, many analysts say it's not a question of if Andy Burnham will challenge for the top job, but when. Anand Menon is a professor of European politics and foreign affairs at King's College London and the director of the London-based think tank UK in a Changing Europe. Nice to see you, sir. Thanks for coming on.
Absolute pleasure.
Well, Labour's Andy Burnham secured a decisive victory in this by-election in Greater Manchester. It's being described, I guess, as a political earthquake in Britain. Help our Canadian audience understand who this man is and how consequential it is for politics in your country.
Well, Andy Burnham's been around in our politics for a long time. The last time nationally was back in Gordon Brown's government when he was Health Secretary. He subsequently left Parliament and went to Manchester, where he became mayor. And he's built his profile in Manchester as mayor, particularly during COVID, to become a regional politician with national reach. And as this by-election showed, he's almost uniquely popular in the northwest of the country around Manchester, which is how he managed to pull off this stunning by-election victory.
And I guess he could contend for power, right? He could be a possible contender for the prime ministership. Tell me how that process could unfold, because I guess Mr. Burnham says he will enter any leadership contest that comes about if there is one to replace Starmer. Is it inevitable at this point that Burnham could take over, or is there a chance Starmer hangs on?
Well, it's incredibly messy in the sense that most people expect Andy Burnham to launch a leadership campaign if no one else does it in the interim. The big question to which we don't know the answer is what Prime Minister Keir Starmer will do. He's been insisting in the last 24 hours that he intends to fight. If there's a contest, he will be a contender in that contest. What we've seen reports about over the course of the last few hours is that he's going to take the weekend to decide what he wants to do, take soundings from his colleagues. It might be that sufficient numbers of his colleagues turn around to him and say, Prime Minister, look, you need to go, but they change his mind. At the moment, we just don't know. So we have two options. If we don't have a contest, then Andy Burnham could be Prime Minister within a relatively short space of time. If we do, that contest will doubtless last several months, and we won't know the identity of the new Prime Minister until the autumn. Is it possible that Starmer wins? All the polling we've seen to date suggests it's unlikely, but a lot can change if there is a contest. And I think supporters of Starmer think he's a more serious politician with a better grasp of policy than Andy Burnham, so he could actually do well if there are debates during a contest.
Keir Starmer, secured a massive majority government for Labour, right, at the last general election. I was looking at the figures today. 411 seats, 9.5 million votes. And now, less than 2 years later, he could be out. How did we get to this point? Like, how is he so deeply unpopular that there's this move within his own party to try and get him out?
I think there's three parts to an answer to that. The first is, despite the massive majority Keir Starmer secured in 2024, he did it on the lowest share of the vote any winning government has ever secured in our country. And what the polling shows is that the majority of people, I think 48% of people who voted for Labour, said they voted for Labour simply to get the Conservatives out. So the victory was a function of dissatisfaction with the Conservatives who'd been in power for 14 years. That being said, it's also the case that the government hasn't been particularly effective. There's been a series of damaging U-turns. There was a scandal about corruption over Taylor Swift ticket. Keir Starmer himself has proved to be a fairly bad communicator, unable to get over any sense of mission for his government. And the final point I'd make is this. All of our last four prime ministers have at some time or other been the most unpopular prime minister we've ever had, which suggests to me that there's a secular trend here, which is the British economy has essentially flatlined for almost 20 years, since 2008. Median wages have barely risen since 2008. And there is a growing and building sense of dissatisfaction amongst the British public. That means not only that trust in politicians has cratered, but that the British public are more and more likely to opt for populist alternatives because they're increasingly fed up with the mainstream. And I do think that Keir Starmer, to an extent, is a victim of that long pent-up frustration, for which he is not obviously solely responsible.
Yeah, one party that speaks to that frustration, that dissatisfaction, of course, is Reform UK. Going into Thursday, many pundits had predicted that there could be a good showing for this party. But when you actually look at the results from the Makerfield by-election, they were distant to Burnham. Despite having that strong showing, right, in the May local elections, I think they picked up nearly 700 seats, right, in councils up and down the country. So that was just a few weeks ago, really. And now they've been trounced here in Makerfield. What's going on for the Reformers? Where do they go from here?
I think there are several things. You're absolutely right. In the local elections in May, they picked up, I think, all the council seats that were up for election in the area where this by-election was held. That being said, I think with this by-election, there were two specific factors. One is Burnham, who is really popular, who is a national figure, who had the full weight of the Labour Party machine behind him. And that contrasted to a local candidate from Reform, who was found to have said some rather unpleasant things about women on social media, which I think worked against him. The second thing that should really worry Reform is the fact that what we saw in this by-election was that everyone who didn't want reform, Conservative voters, Lib Dem voters, Green voters, rallied behind the Labour candidate in an anti-reform vote. And that speaks to the fact that in a general election, if we get tactical voting, there is such strong anti-reform feeling that might serve to keep them from winning as many seats as they hope.
The Conservatives were thought, left for dead. Not too long ago, as you said, they were in power for 14 years and they were deeply unpopular. But there was a victory for them in Scotland last night. I think it's the first by-election win for the Scottish Conservatives in 50 years. The party's leader, Kemi Badenoch, is obviously thrilled today. Does this give the party a fighting chance? Are they back in the mix now that they've been able to pull off a win in Scotland?
I mean, it's a mixed picture from the Conservatives coming out of Thursday's elections. On the one hand, they polled, I think, about 3% against Andy Burnham, so that's cause for concern. On the other hand, as you say, in this seat up in the north of Scotland, they did well. There are some specificities, which is this seat was in Aberdeen, where there is a big debate over the future of the oil and gas industry and drilling in the North Sea, and the Conservatives exploited that. But what this shows is there's a degree of dissatisfaction with the SNP in Scotland, so people were willing to vote against them. And I think the Tories benefited from a lot of anti-independence parties rallying behind the party that could beat the SNP. But I think there's a long way to go before you can say that what is our most successful political party is anywhere near back in contention for national office, because they're still polling at around, I think, 16%, which is very, very low for them.
Let's end on Burnham. He's been a regional mayor, as you say. He's spent many years kind of attacking what he calls a broken Westminster-centric system. He's got kind of this regional populist left brand of politics. If he becomes prime minister, do you expect to see major policy shifts? Like, how would he govern differently than Keir Starmer and sort of the Labour Party brand we've seen to this point from him?
I mean, hand on heart, I don't know. I'm not absolutely sure, because Andy Burnham said precious little about what he intends to do in the by-election, for good reason. The by-election was about representing the constituency, so they talked about constituency matters. But as a result, there's a bit of a hole where a governing project should be. Because he's been mayor of Manchester, he's not have to talk about the state of the national debt or what our policy is towards Israel or the United States, because, of course, Manchester doesn't have a foreign policy. So actually, at the moment, we're still pretty much in the dark. There are some very vague hints about the policy direction. He's talked a little bit about nationalising certain industries. He's talked a little bit about potentially reforming our electoral system. For the moment, that is not a programme, and they're not absolutely pledged. So we're going to have to wait and see over the next few weeks if that gets any clearer.
All right, let's leave it there. Anand Menon, appreciate you making time for us. He is the director of the London-based think tank UK in a Changing Europe. Nice to see you, sir.
Thank you for having me.